What is the evidential method of apologetics, right? That is going to be the topic of discussion in this video. And what I hope to do is just break down this topic for us and explain it in layman's terms. Now, I do have to warn you that there will be some scholarly verbiage used in this video, but I'm going to try my best to define them for us as we progress in this video so that you don't lose track, right? My goal in this video is very simple. It is just to present the evidential method of apologetics for those who may be genuinely, interested in understanding it and maybe even seeking to compare and contrast it with other apologetic methodologies, such as, the cumulative case method, the classical method, etc., to see which of these methods may be best suited for you. Now, speaking of the other methods of apologetics, if you have not seen my previous videos in my Christian apologetics series, then I don't know what you're doing, right? I really urge you to go and watch those videos after you're finished with this one, as I believe they're just helpful resources in understanding the full context of not only this video, but also the conversation surrounding Christian apologetics at large. My goal with not only this series, but also with my YouTube channel is to provide theological depth for your everyday people, right? I found that so many Christians either are unaware of these different aspects of their faith and thereby confused when approached with subjects like this one, or are uninterested in learning about the depths of their faith, opting for a type of simplistic understanding of their religion or a type of blissful ignorance, if you will. And I believe that neither of those are viable options for us if we're going to be faithful in obeying Peter's charge for us to be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks us for the reason for the hope that's inside us, right? This charge is actually found in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 14 through 16, for those who may be wondering what I'm referring to. Now, I want to pause here because I want to be careful not to put an unnecessary yoke on the minds and consciousness of my fellow believers out there by my stating the importance of this topic. And I guess I can do that a little bit better by just stating clearly, for the record, that this conversation is not a gospel issue. In other words, you can go your whole life not understanding a lick about apologetics and still be saved, right? Apologetics is merely about defending your faith, either through giving positive reasons for it or through combating negative critiques of it. It has nothing to do with how we are saved. I just want to make that abundantly clear at the outset, lest I create, a stumbling block for my fellow believer who may be confused by my sense of urgency with this topic. Now, I'm just super passionate about helping people understand this field of study, not because I believe, again, that it is a gospel issue, but because I believe understanding apologetics can help, promote gospel assurance and, confidence in defending your belief. A lot of Christians just don't know that there are positive reasons for why we believe the things that we believe. And I just want to do my part in helping them understand that there is a whole field of study dedicated to helping them defend the truth claims of the Bible. And why wouldn't you want to be interested in sharpening your faith, right? Why wouldn't you want to be faithful to Peter's charge, to have a reason for the faith that's inside you? Why wouldn't you want that gospel assurance and that confidence to be able to face any critique of Christianity that is out there? I don't know about you, but I don't have a good answer for saying why I wouldn't want these things. And I would actually venture to go a step further by stating that you don't really have a good answer or a reason for not wanting to be interested in this either, right? So do me and yourself a favor. Lay aside the fear of the possibility that you won't understand this conversation. Don't worry. You're going to understand it. It took me so many times of rereading different passages of books and rewatching different videos for me to get it, right? I'm not claiming to be the smartest guy in the room, right? So again, it may take you rewatching this video a couple of times before you can get it. Don't worry. Let yourself learn for a second, right? The second thing is lay aside your apathy, because this field of study is actually more important now more than ever, right? A lot of Christians tend to think that all they need is just Jesus, and really all Jesus is sufficient for everything that we have and need in our Christian life, right? I'm not denying that. But what we're doing implicitly is by having a false dichotomy. We're creating a false dichotomy. We're saying either all we need is Jesus, or all we need is Jesus plus X, Y, and Z. When the crazy thing about it is that Jesus gave us the scriptures so that we can have reasons for why we believe what we believe, right? So that excuse just falls flat. Lay aside any other excuses that you can think of, and just calm down, right? Lay aside your apathy and get a pen and paper out as I go through this breakdown of the evidential method of apologetics. All right. All right. With that being said, let me give you my outline of this video, because I fear that this may be a longer one. I'm going to break this video up into 5 sections. The first section will be on defining what the evidential method of apologetics is. That's always a good starting point for, doing any types of breakdown on a subject. The second section will be on differentiating the evidential method with the classical method, as they're often mistaken for one another. The third section, it will be dedicated to differentiating the evidential method from evidentialism. That's another, important comparison that people often mistake one for the other. The fourth section will be on providing some points to remember when seeking to understand or employ the evidential method. And then lastly, we're going to wrap this video up by giving some practical application by providing some book recommendations for those who may be interested in exploring this methodology just a bit further, right? All right, so obviously, feel free to skip ahead to the parts of the video that, interest you the most. Again, for my people who may be unfamiliar with this field of study, I imagine that this is going to be that type of video that you have to watch a couple of times to truly grasp everything that was said. But if you come to a word or a portion of the video that was just hard for you to understand, don't give up, right? Just roll with me, okay? Just trust that I'm going to try to break it down as best as possible. But also, use Google. Try to use your resources to also make things clear for you, okay? Okay, let's not waste any more time. Let's start by defining what the evidential method of apologetics is. So the evidential method of apologetics can be defined as the one-step approach. And the task is very simple. Argue for both theism, which is the belief in the existence of at least one God, and Christian theism, which is obviously a belief in Yahweh as that specific God. At the same time, instead of trying to argue for one and then the other. For example, one of the ways how an evidentialist might go about arguing for both theism and Christian theism at the same time is by using Christ's miraculous resurrection from the dead to not only argue for, again, the existence of the Christian God that Jesus obviously preached about and claimed to be in his earthly ministry, but to also argue for the truth claims of Christianity as a whole, as Jesus is, obviously the one who taught the core tenets of this religion, hence the name. And so by doing this, the evidentialist can theoretically successfully argue for both theism and Christian theism in one step. Now, the reason why this approach is called the evidential method is because this methodology typically relies on the use of historical evidences to make its case for the truth of Christianity and to defend, the charges against it. However, one of the things that should be noted, right, is that although historical evidences is what evidentialists would typically use, that does not mean this is the only source of evidence that they could use, right? I believe it's important to point that fact out because the evidential method has often been described as eclectic. And I'm going to break that word down because you don't typically hear that word in our society. Eclectic simply means that this method can derive its approach from a broad and diverse range of sources. For example, one evidentialist may take a historical approach, while another may take a philosophical one, and another may take a scientific one. I think you get the point. This is what they mean when they describe this method as eclectic. It just simply means that the evidentialist is not really pinned down to one specific way for making his case about the truth of God's existence and Christianity as a whole. All right, now that we have a good understanding of what the evidential method is, let's evaluate the differences between this method and the classical method of apologetics, as they are often confused with each other. And this goes into obviously our second section. So the most obvious difference between the two methods is that the classical method is often described as the two-step approach, while the evidential method is, as we just described, as the one-step approach. Now, I've already described what the one-step approach is by defining the evidential method, but what is that two-step approach, right? Well, the two-step approach that the classical apologists use can be defined as this. The first step is to establish the truth of theism through the use of philosophical arguments and natural theology. And then the second step is to establish the truth of Christian theism specifically through the use of historical evidences. Now, at first glance, I think you can easily see how these two methods are often mistaken for one another, right? Both methods are trying to argue for the truth of theism and Christian theism. They both use historical evidences to try to accomplish this. But what you have to remember is that one method is trying to establish both the truth claims of theism and Christian theism in one step, while the other one is obviously trying to do it in two. That's one of the basic points of differentiation that you have to remember when comparing the two. Another point of difference, though, between the classical method and the evidential method is the classical apologists' insistence on using natural theology to establish the existence of God. Now, I know I just used that term twice and really have not defined it, so I'm going to try to do that now. Simply put, natural theology is not theology that is derived from nature, as the word would suggest, right? But rather, it is the theology that is derived and deduced from our natural faculties of reason and logic without the reliance on special revelation, i.e. the Bible, to come to the conclusion that God exists, right? Now, I made a whole video explaining this concept a bit further and helping people understand why the classical apologists would use this type of theology and apologetics to begin with, right? The video is actually called The Classical Method of Apologetics. You should really go and check that out at the conclusion of this video. It's in my apologetic playlist, which I'll have linked in the description box below. Now, I say all of that to say, as you remember these two basic differences, then you can start to get a clear understanding what the classical method of apologetics is and what the evidential method is and how you can differentiate the two. So now that we've established the differences between the evidential method and the classical method, we can now turn our attention to another point of contention, that being the apparent confusion between the evidential method in evidentialism, right? And I can already feel and understand why people misunderstand these two, right? Or think that these two have something in common with each other. I mean, they sound similar. One is called evidentialism. The other one's called the evidential method, obviously, of apologetics. When you refer to the proponents of both the methodology and the epistemological theory, we call them evidentialists. So I can certainly see how this can be a bit confusing. And I guess we could honestly try to help people out by, maybe referring to people who hold to the evidential method as evidential apologists. I don't know, maybe that may be a helpful distinction, but I don't know. It's just easier and more natural to call both of them evidentialists, right? I don't know. Who knows? We may figure out something in the future to resolve this, but for right now, we're just going to have to live with clarifying ourselves whenever this confusion arises. But I want to pause here because I know I've just introduced some other big words that some of you may or may not be familiar with, right? And I don't want anybody to get lost in translation. So first, I want to start by defining what evidentialism is before I begin differentiating it with the evidential method of apologetics. So evidentialism is first an epistemological theory. Now, what in the world does that mean? I know some of you are probably like, Janai, I don't know what epistemological even means, right? Don't worry, I got you. The word epistemological derives from the word, epistemology. I don't know why that was such a tongue twister. I guess saying both of them at the same time kind of messes your mouth up. Anyway, it derives from the word epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy concerning knowledge. So, in other words, when we study epistemology, we want to know, how do we know what we know? So, have you ever asked somebody a question, how do you know that? Right? Like, let's take the idea that Elvis is still alive. And, you're talking to these type of conspiracy theorists and you're asking them, how do you know Elvis is still alive? What evidence do you have that Elvis is still alive, right? We know that he died on this date, right? What you're doing is challenging that person from epistemological standpoint, right? We've all asked these questions, right? Well, each and every one of those questions, whenever we ask people, how do you know what you know, is essentially an epistemological question in essence. So when we say that evidentialism is an epistemological theory, what we mean is that this is in a hypothesis for understanding how do we know what we know for sure, right? All right, I think you kind of understand that. So let's move into what evidentialism actually says about how do we know what we know for sure, right? So evidentialism states that one is justified in believing something if and only if that person has evidence which supports said belief. So in other words, evidentialism says that if you don't have enough, supporting evidence to, support whatever that belief you hold, then it's not rational or logical for you to believe it, right? Are you seeing why this is nothing like the evidential method of apologetics, right? Because the evidential method of apologetics says nothing about how much evidence you need to amass to warrant you believing in theism or Christian theism for that matter. Also, it has nothing to do with trying to promote the belief that all of our knowledge of things come through overwhelming evidence. I mean, if we needed overwhelming evidence for holding every belief that we believe, then we wouldn't even hold to evidentialism, because what is the overwhelming evidence that evidentialism is true? You see what I'm saying? Love, things like love, beauty, joy, right? These are all real, but they're conceptual. So how can you go about providing evidences that these concepts are realities, right? And how would you substantiate those beliefs? You really can't. And so that is where evidentialism falls flat. But I would love to go down that rabbit trail, but I think you get the point. The evidential method and evidentialism are not related, although they do share a lot of obvious similarities, like their name and so on and so forth. Now, I also want to point this out too. Although they're not related, one could believe in evidentialism and hold to the evidential method of apologetics, just like how someone can believe in rationalism and hold to the evidential method, right? There are many different epistemological theories that you can believe and still hold to the evidential method of apologetics, because the method is not tied to any one epistemological theory in and of itself, right? It's not tied to evidentialism. So you're free to hold to any different, rationalism, things of that nature. The method is merely concerned about how we argue for the truth claims of theism and Christian theism. Okay, so now that we have just defined what the evidential method is and differentiated with the classical method and the evidentialism, I want to discuss some key things to remember when seeking to understand or employ the method of apologetics, right? The first thing that you got to remember is that we have to be cautious with how we use historical events as evidences for justifying one's belief in God and Christianity. The reason being is not because evidentialists believe that history is subjective per se, but because they understand that there are those who will try to manipulate the facts of history to support whatever position that they are trying to hold. And this goes for Christianity. For Christians as well. We're not exempt from this temptation. I know a lot of us, whenever we feel like we're under attack, we'll kind of, fabricate or stretch the truth of things and things of that nature. And my caution to you is that there's no need to do that. Right. And each time that you do that, you start to undermine your own position. Right. That is why we ought to proceed with caution and do our due diligence with researching the truth about these historical evidences before we posit them as evidences for our particular position. The second thing that we must remember when seeking to understand or employ this method of apologetics is that no amount of logic or historical evidences can convince someone into believing in the truth of theism or Christian theism, for that matter. This is important for us to remember, because when we use this method of apologetics, we are obviously going to be using this method with, most of our family and friends, and it's going to get frustrating at times because you're going to feel like, you just made this convincing case for why you believe what you believe, and you feel like they still don't get it. Right. And when that happens, I want to remind you of this point, because trust me, it will happen. It happens, to all of us and, and to the best of us. I understand the frustration with trying to convince someone of the truth. Trust me, I get it. But that is why the goal of the evidential method of apologetics for or just apologetics in general, for that matter, is not about trying to convince someone, but rather to provide a convincing argument in defense of the faith that you hold to be true, right? That's the goal. If someone wants to be convinced of the truth of Christianity, then all we have to offer them is the gospel. That's it. That's all we have, right? We've got to remember that. It's not saying that we can present a convincing argument to someone or for why the gospel is true. It's not saying that we can't do that. It's not saying that we can't use some of the big words that were used in this video. I'm not saying any of that, right? I don't want you to take such a simplistic approach, because in reality, life is much more nuanced than that. So what exactly am I saying? I'm saying that we just have to remember that what should be at the core of our discussion is the gospel and sufficiency of it to change the hearts and lives of men and women with hardened hearts, right? That is why every Christian apologist is quick to remind everyone of the importance of the Holy Spirit in the effectuation of this process, because absent of the Holy Spirit, nothing's going to change in the unbeliever, right? As we present our apologia, which is our defense of the gospel, we need to be sure that we don't lose sight of that fact, or else we risk losing the point of apologetics entirely. So I want to end this video by providing some, practical recommendations or book recommendations for those who may be interested in furthering their study on the evidential method of apologetics. And this is bringing it to the last section of this video. Maybe you are the person who wants to know how one goes about using this method practically, right? You're probably like, thanks for introducing me to a bunch of big words that I probably don't understand or I probably won't remember, but how can I be an evidential apologist, right? If that is you, then I got some books for you from some prominent Christian evidentialists that you can go check out, right? So the first book is by John W. Montgomery. It is titled Christianity in History, right? That's definitely a great book for you to get started. And he has another one that I believe is equally great, which is titled The Shape of the Past, A Christian Response to Secular Philosophies of History, right? Another fun fact of Montgomery, I don't know, most people probably don't even know who he is, but once you know who he is, a fun fact about him is that he has 11 earned degrees. I don't know about you, but I found that fact so absolutely insane. Like, did he just live and breathe school? Like, that's crazy. Now, that fact doesn't automatically make, you right on a topic, but it does mean that, we should at least hear out what that person has to say on it, right? But even if you don't care about a person's credentials, but merely in how credible his argument is. These are some good books to get started with. All right, the next book is titled Set Forth Your Case, an examination of Christianity's credentials by Clark Pinnock. This book is about 144 pages, so it's not long at all, but man, is it packed with some good stuff. Another book is Jesus, God and Man by Wolfhard Pannenberg. Now, this one is not as short as Pinnock's, but that certainly doesn't make it any better or any worse, right? They're both good books, and although they both aim to do the same thing, they're two different approaches to getting to that goal, right? So I think you should go and check out both of them if you have the time and obviously the money. All right, those are my book recommendations if you're looking to get started in learning more about how to use the evidential method of apologetics in the real world. Again, you don't need to have a particular method to be able to do Christian apologetics, right? You don't. Now, although you don't, some may argue that you probably do, right? But that's, again, where the debate kind of ensues. And I just love it, right? Because you get to compare and contrast. And we all realize that, again, this isn't a gospel issue. Just want to make that very clear. But I just think this is just a wholesome conversation that we should just have a little bit more of, right? We need to discuss the nuance about our faith, right? But what truly really matters is that you just go out and that you learn the truth of not only theism, but Christian theism, so that you can be confident in defending your beliefs, and so that you can be confident in yourself and believing that what you hold to is true, right? So anyways, guys, that's the video. Let me know what you think about the evidential method in the comment section. I'm sorry if this video was a bit longer, but I did pre-warn you in the beginning. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. It's certainly appreciated and it helps this channel grow. But until next time, guys, peace.